from time to time why I leave that laptop over there. That is, I have zero faith in the battery, and I try to leave it charging as long as it possibly can. It's good to see you this evening. A couple of points of order before housekeeping kind of things. The elders have talked, and we're going to have the fifth Sunday dinner, of course, on the 31st. And then immediately after that, we'll have the evening service, and that'll be the singing service. So make plans for that. We'll eat, and I think we're try to start no later than 1 o'clock, I think. Usually we get, let's see, what is it? Done at 11, 12, so 12:30, 1, whatever time we can, get that cleaned up. And does anybody remember what group's in charge? I know Group 2 is going to point at Group 3, and Group 3 is going to point at Group 2. Does anybody remember who had the last one? It's 3. That seems to be the consensus. So Group 3, is that you, Patty? Okay, I noticed how your countenance fell when you saw that. But no. So Group 3 is in charge, and also Wanda Williams is not feeling good tonight. So remember her. Also, Brother Helm, Patty said that, Ms. Helm said, Marty said that Bill will be going when he finishes his rehab, which has got to be getting close to being over, that he'd be going to the Dunlap rehab facility. So remember all these people, all these stuff that we've got going on. Really appreciate the prayers of the men here, and I think Brother Francis today, Jerry this morning, so many times brought out when our men pray. I think we can hear the urgency in their prayers of the situation, and I think dire circumstances in our country, and I think rightfully so. I'm sure that every generation has had the same thing. One of the things that I do from time to time to try to comfort myself, go back and read a 100-year-old copy of the Gospel Advocate and listen how those preachers talking about, oh, the world's coming to an end. And I'm thinking, well, it's not as bad as sometimes we think. And a lot of times it has to do with how we look at it. I don't have it with me, Patty. I'm sorry. We can go ahead. What do you have? You have an announcement?
Well, I was going to ask you to remember Walker's cousin's son who's having a
Yes, thank you. And his name was Luke Castle. Luke Castle, 15. He has a brain tumor, and they think it's going to be very, in other words, there's a high probability of success in the surgery. It doesn't seem to be one of those that wants to spread, and it seems like it's in a good place to get to it. So Luke Castle, and that's somebody that Patty and they have a close relationship with him. They go camping with that side of the family on every year, and so I know that they're all concerned. We're going to look at 4 different men tonight and look at how God dealt with them and help us as we walk. The song that Eli led first, that my hope, is I'll live in glory. I can still remember Stanley Baker singing the bass part of that song, and I always tried to sit close to Stanley because he was a good bass singer, and I couldn't sing at all. And so I wanted to be as close to him as I could. He was the man, of course, the preacher at Hooker when I started attending, and obeyed the gospel under his tutelage, and just really thought a lot of him. But I know that he's in that everlasting home. And so many of us can think about loved ones we've lost, members of the church who've gone on to that reward, and how thankful we are that they're no longer suffering in their bodies. They've, like the Ecclesiastes writer could say, the end of a thing is better than the beginning. And that'll cause us to stop for a minute. And in the context there, he's talking about funerals and things like that. And he's saying the person that's dead, you know what happens. You know how their life was. They preached their sermon while they were been alive. And so they're in good shape. But for that child that's just being born, think about children being born in the United States right now. Or think about children being born in Muslim countries. What is going to be the probability, the opportunity for a young person or a baby being born right now in Saudi Arabia to ever hear the gospel of Jesus Christ? It's going to be very, very slim. Because everybody that's about as close to a theocracy as you'll get, too, as a Muslim country. Because you go there and you see how much they practice toleration when it comes to Christianity. it's not done. They don't, you can go there and you can assimilate into the culture, and you can, do all the things they ask you to do, women walking behind the man, women wearing the hijab, and then, you can try to have your worship service on Sunday at a church in the name of Christ, and they'll put a stop to that. They're not as we are here in the United States. And so I think that's something that we need to think about from time to time. But the situation we looked at last week, it's going to be better in the by and by. We know that. We know, we have the faith, the confidence that God has said that He's going to take care of us. He'll never leave us. Jesus went to prepare us a place. We know that the dead right now are in the place of departed spirits. Those that have gone on who have been in the Christ are in Abraham's bosom. We have all the confidence in the world of that. And so we don't have to worry about them. And so depending on how you look at it, we're a whole lot worse off than they are. They've gone on. They've made the rewards. Ours is still up in the air. We've still got to be faithful. And the times are becoming a little bit more difficult as we mature and our country changes. The demographics change. You won't turn on the television. I don't even know when I did that. Must have been today, this afternoon. Drew Milligan is a gospel preacher up in Middle Tennessee, and he was saying that his wife had come home. He was in the kitchen studying, and she had cut the TV on Hulu and had to immediately cut it back off because of all the language. 50 years ago, you wouldn't have had that problem. You'd have turned it on. It might have been Gilligan's Island. About the worst violence you were going to see is Skipper hitting Gilligan with his hat. You remember that? And it's just different. We live in different times. Me and one of the brothers were talking before services how language has changed so much and how difficult it is when you grow up in an environment like that or work in an environment where you're constantly being berated with that to let it go. It's a difficult thing. But what we're going to be talking about tonight is four different men. We're going to look at Job. We're going to look at Jeremiah. We're going to look at Habakkuk. And so as we do that, we looked at some things that will understand things better in the future. Job, let's turn to Job chapter 1, if you will. A couple of points we'll make as we go through this. Job is, I always try to remember, he's right in front of the Psalms. If you open up, you have a study Bible. Usually if you open it up about halfway, you're going to hit the Psalms. Then you can work your way back to Job. Job's a difficult book to study in that it's a running dialogue for most of the book between some friends of his and him. In Job chapter 1, you're going to see that Job is a great man in the land of Uz. And he has 7 sons, 3 daughters. That's 10 altogether. Notice the numbers of animals he has, and is just a very wealthy man. Notice in verse 6, there was a day when the sons of God, that's the angels, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. That's the adversary. That's the one who's going to cause them trouble. And then notice what the Lord says. The Lord says unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect man, upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? And then Satan's reply is that, well, does God fear you? Does Job fear God for naught? Hast thou not made a hedge about him? Have you not built a fence around him where you protect everything? He says, Put forth thine hand now, verse 11, and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And so the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he hath is in thine power, only upon himself put not forth thine hand. And so you know the story. Satan immediately goes to work, kills all 10 of his kids, takes all of his livestock, everything that the man has, save his wife. Just ruins him financially. Well, the conversation will pick up again. And, after everything's been taken from Job, Satan will say, Job, God will say again, you've caused me to lift my hand against him. He was faithful. And if that's when, the devil will say, well, skin for skin. He says, notice verse 4, the Lord said, skin for skin. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. Yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. In other words, you make him sick, you touch his life, and he'll fold. He'll curse you to your face. And so the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. And so Satan went forth, and from the presence of the Lord smote Job with sore boils from the head of his feet, or from the head of his crown of his head to his feet. So the man's in just miserable condition. You know, he ran fevers, he had infection. Everything that you could imagine to go wrong has went wrong for Job. I don't believe any of us have been through everything that this man goes through. And so it's a terrible situation. It's just awful. Even his wife will say, you know, Job, you keep fighting. Why don't you just curse God and die? I mean, it's a terrible situation. Why don't you just succumb to it? But he doesn't do that. And then, of course, the storyline begins. His friends are going to come. And you have Eliphaz, one of the friends. Their friends are listed here all together. Verse 11 there in chapter 2. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Wasn't Zophar the bad guy in Toy Story? Wasn't that? You remember? It's funny how my mind works, isn't it? You don't remember Zophar? Well, anyway. Huh? That was Zerg? Zerg. Oh, man, I'm way off. Anyway, you've got Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and for a week they won't even talk. And that's their best work right there. Because when they do start talking, they're really speaking out of ignorance, even though they don't think that they are. And imagine you're in a situation where everything this has happened to you. You have done nothing. You've gone to church. You've raised up your family in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Remember Job, he was offering up sacrifices for his children just in case they had sinned in chapter 1. He was the patriarch. He took that responsibility took it and ran with it. He was the priest. He offered up sacrifice. He's raised his children up to fear God. He's gone to services, if you will, for whatever they had in that day and time of the patriarchal period. He's done everything that he could to be faithful to God. God said he's a perfect man and upright. And so Job's a good man. And so his three friends come, and for the next 35 chapters, basically they're going to accuse him of everything under the sun. Imagine how that would make you feel, and you're not deserving of any of it. But they're saying, you had to have done something because, bad things don't happen to good people. God's going to look out for his people. So what have you done to bring this upon yourself? Well, about halfway through this dialogue, it starts to work on Job. And he starts thinking, not that he doesn't trust God, not that he doesn't love God, but he's saying, you know what? I'd like to talk to him. I sure would. I don't think that I'm being dealt with fairly here. And so he says, I think I would like to talk to God. And then we'll see at the end of this dialogue that a young man speaks up, and he's got things to say about Job. Well, Job starts really thinking about, I want to talk to God. I really want to know what he has to say about all this, because I don't appreciate the way things have gone. So you turn to the last 4 chapters of the book of Job. Job's in a bad situation. His friends accuse him of sin. Job quit questioning God and started accusing God of treating him unfair. Well, in Job 38, you know the story. God appears to him out of a whirlwind. About the best way I know to try to describe that is a tornado. And he says, who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? In other words, God's saying, Job, you want to take up a conversation with me? You want to counsel me? He says in verse 3, gird up now thy loins like a man. We might today say muscle up. Get ready, fella. Here we go. I demand thee of an answer. Answer thou me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And he'll go through this whole section here, and he will talk about the various things that he's done. Some of them will involve huge creatures and so forth. Anybody have a word search on your thing real quick? Would you look and see in the King James Version where it says unicorn? Because I wanted to show you that. I want to talk about that just for a moment in a way of, if you have a King James, that'd be the best thing. Just look up unicorn. I was thinking it was verse 17. Anybody? Y'all going to make me do it? No, I need it in the book of Job there at the end. 39:9. Okay, let's take a look at that. Chapter 39, verse 9. Let's see what that says there in the good old King James. It says, will the unicorn be willing to serve thee or abide by thy crib? Now, what do we know about the unicorn? It's a mythical creature, isn't it? It never existed. And so people will say, well, you see right there, the Bible's a mythology book. I mean, a unicorn. Unicorn didn't exist. Well, some of the newer translations, anybody here have a newer translation? Wild ox, that's right. You know why they said unicorn? I don't. It's just something, they have no idea what that Hebrew word means. We don't. There are several words in the Hebrew that we have no idea what they mean. And the thing that's, and why is that? You have to remember the Hebrew language was never a language that was a world language. As a matter of fact, if you think of world languages, what's the only two that come to mind? Anybody? Maybe three. But I'd definitely go with Greek. Okay, the whole known world in the first century spoke Greek. It was the commercial language. What is another language that's a world language? Come on, speak up. A world language. In other words, everybody in the world has some working knowledge of it. Has to have. No, now, ever. English, yeah. If you want to fly a plane, you want to land it, you know what you've got to have to get your pilot's license? A working knowledge of the English language, because it's the language of trade. It's the language of, that's, even the air carriers say you have to know. Well, so that, and I'm thinking that Latin may have been considered a world language because of the influence of Rome and so forth. Maybe. But definitely Greek. Definitely. What's that? Pig Latin? Is that what you... I heard that. Pig Latin. Oh, could be. You have no idea what some of these words. Now, this, are you talking about the behemoth on the net, or the unicorn here? I would, a wild ox or rhinoceros. You're going to have the behemoth and what's the other thing? Somebody help me out. But Leviathan, yes. We don't know what that's talking about. But if you had to take a guess, do you think one of those might fit the definition of a dinosaur? I think so. I think both of them got a pretty good shot at being dinosaurs. Folks, did dinosaurs walk the earth? Boy, if they didn't, we got a problem, because they're laying everywhere in the dirt all over, right? Yes, of course they did. Why doesn't the Bible talk about them? Well, I think right here that it is. But I wanted you to see and we don't know what some words in the Hebrew meant. And for a long time, it became a dead language. It wasn't studied. It wasn't taught. What happened to the Jewish people? Their whole system of life was eradicated on AD 70 by a soon-to-be emperor, Titus of Rome, who leveled the temple, Jerusalem. They were carried into Babylonian captivity and would not return for 70 years from the time of the first deportation till they came back. And so, Hebrew didn't really become a studied language again until, anybody know when? When it was it 54 when it became an actual, or was it 48 when it became a 1948? I was thinking 48. Was it 48 when the United Nations declared that we're going to make this area here Israel? And so it became Hebrew was going to be the national language. They started studying Hebrew again. And one of the only reasons I know that is I get these emails all the time from where I was taking Hebrew, from Hebrew National College and so forth, and they really promote that today. They really try to get folks to do that and learn Hebrew. It's their national language. But see, there's a lot of words that they don't know. They don't even know how to say God's name, because there were no vowel points in that day. They wouldn't say it. They'd say Adonai. So there's a lot of idiosyncrasies about the Hebrew language. But for the most part, we know what every word means. And the ones that we don't, at least as Christians, we're honest enough to say, you know what, we have no idea what that's talking about. But we know there's no such thing as a unicorn. The King James translators used that, and I wish that they hadn't. Well, Job, of course, gets his wish, and God asks him all these questions. But the one thing in all of that is that God never answers Job's complaint. God asks Job questions, not Job getting that finally find. God, why did you do this to me? God doesn't tell him, look, I was protecting you. Satan wanted to have you. He wanted to kill you. He wanted to do everything he could to destroy you. I restrained him from doing that. Job didn't know that it was Satan attacking him. He thought some reason God was punishing him, and he was just totally wrong about that. But what I want us to see in this is that God didn't come to him and say, Job, this is This is what happened. I'm going to explain it to you. And matter of fact, he basically asks Job, who are you to question what it is that I'm doing? You see, Job had a humility problem here. And, of course, he says, he hardly gets started. And he says, I want to lay my hand across my mouth. I realize I've spoken out of turn here, God. I'm sorry that I did that. And, of course, it all works out in that Job is blessed. And, of course, Job is one of those great heroes of the faith. But God never told Job what was going on in his life. Can you imagine what it was like for Job to get to heaven, see his children, have that great reunion, or not heaven, but paradise, and then find out that all of that was never God's fault. It was Satan's fault. Totally wrong. His friends, very religious men who were saying, you've sinned, somehow you brought this on yourself, didn't have a clue. They were as wrong as they could be. The young man who was arguing against them, wrong. All of them. Everybody in this dialogue was wrong. They had no idea what was going on. So a lot of times when we're suffering, what changed Job's mind about his situation? It changed it all. God just simply asked him some questions, and immediately he knew the thing that he had a problem with God about, how he wanted to speak to it and so forth, wasn't a problem. He said, God, you're right. No explanation at all. Does not even talk about the conflict with the devil, and God does not heal him. Everything stops, and of course Job gets better. Job changes his mind, repents, and then God says, okay, other fellas who've been giving Job a hard time, you need to tell Job that you want him to pray for you, because he's going to need to mediate for you because you've been wrong in what you have done. So Job repents, and they repent. How did God do it? Got him to change his mind by simply making him think in a different way. This is the God of heaven. He's in control of it all. I need to trust him. And whatever happens in my life, well, that's the way it is. And when I die, I'm going to be blessed. I'm going to be rewarded. In this life, I don't know everything that's going on. And brethren, you don't either. Getting Job to see that God is in control, that he created it, he understands it. Trust him. That was the whole point of that book, is that we don't know. Good men suffer. There was a fellow by the name of C.S. Lewis. He is probably known as, I guess, one of the great Christian writers. I thought it was real interesting. Brother Warren, Thomas B. Warren, the apologist, has a place that's named after him now. It's called Warren Apologetics. And they're having a fellow, and not just a guy, but that's some type of fellow, from an English college who's going to be coming and speaking, talking about C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis used the kind of logic that Brother Warren used as far as evidences for God. See, C.S. Lewis was an atheist, just a full-blown atheist. He taught literature at Oxford College. And there was another young man there at that time by the name of J.R. Tolkien. Y'all ever heard that name? He wrote the Lord of the Rings books. So imagine those two great minds at that institution at the same time. Must have been a neat place to go to school. But they got to talking. And, of course, Lewis, there was a third guy involved as well, who was a professor at Reading College. Anyway, they got to talking, and C.S. Lewis didn't have a problem reading about the pagan gods and their sacrifices and death and coming back and things of that nature. And what J.R. Tolkien was able to get him to do was consider the fact of the Christ being the one true myth. And by that he meant, you've read all this literature about this. What if this that happened to Christ was indeed true? And he was able to take what C.S. Lewis would look at. His argument was, with all this suffering and everything that's going on, there can't be a God. And J.R. Tolkien would simply say, well, why do you call it suffering? He says, if there's no God, then there's no standard, there's no good things, there's no bad things, there's just things. You see, when we start labeling some things evil and some things good, we're saying that there's some kind of standard. Where did that standard come from? And so insinuating that insinuates that there is a God, there is a standard, there is good things that happen, there are bad things that happen. And that was the principle that really got C.S. Lewis into believing in the God of heaven and ultimately becoming a Christian, was the fact, the standard he had used, good and bad, in and of itself insinuated that there was a higher power, that there was a God in heaven. Turn with me, if you will, to Psalm 73. So Job is right in front of Psalm 73. We're going to have the same kind of situation we just spoke of with Job, but this is going to be reverse. If you Psalm 73, of course, this fellow's name was Asaph, a psalm of Asaph, not a psalm of David. So as we read this, keep that in mind. The situation is reversed. In the book of Job, we had the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Well, that's not what Psalm 73 is about. He's saying, why do good things happen to bad people? Why do the wicked prosper? Why do others prosper? The song we sing, living so wicked year after year. Look at Psalm 73. He says, truly God is good to Israel, even to such as are of a clean heart. But as for me, my feet were almost gone. My steps had well nigh slipped. In other words, he's saying, I was about ready to backslide, if you will. For I was envious at the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. There is no bands in their death, but their strength is firm. And so he'll go through and he'll ask some questions. Is the problem drinking, wandering eye, greed for money? No, his problem is that, same with Job, life ain't fair. Why in the world are these wicked people prospering so well? They're wealthy, they have no troubles. Notice verse 5. They are not in trouble as other men, neither are they plagued like other men. Everything goes their way. Notice verse 6 and 7. Therefore pride compassed them about as a chain, violence covered them as a garment. Their eyes stand out with fatness. They have more than heart could wish. They are corrupt, they speak wickedly. Concerning oppression, they speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongue walketh through the earth. And he says, why are you blessing these people? Notice verse 12. Behold, all these are the ungodly who prosper in the world. They increase in riches. He says, verily, I have cleansed my heart in vain. In other words, I'm obeying your laws. I'm doing all this for nothing. I wash my hands in innocency. For all the day long have I been plagued and chastened every morning. If I say I will speak thus, behold, I should offend against the generation of thy children. What's he saying? I haven't said anything about it. He said, I didn't want to be a stumbling block to anybody else, but he says, God, this is not good. I don't appreciate it at all. They even talk evil about you in verse 11. He says, it doesn't pay to serve God is his idea there in verse 13. And this is too hard for me, he says. This problem's taking a lot of people over to atheism. Why is life unfair? Well, what's going to rescue him? Memory. Remember what Peter said? I bring you, as long as I'm in this tabernacle, I want to bring you in remembrance. That's exactly what saved Asaph. Notice verse 17. Until I went into the sanctuary of God, then understood I their end. Surely thou didst set them in slippery places. Thou castest them down into the destruction. How they are brought into desolation, and as in a moment they are utterly consumed with terrors. And he says this was something that, I saw when I remembered. And then notice what he says. In verse 26, my flesh, my heart faileth, but God is the strength of my heart, and my portion forever. For lo, they that are far from thee shall perish. Thou hast destroyed all of them that go a-whoring from thee. But it is good for me to draw near to God. I have put my trust in the Lord God, that I may declare all thy works. Notice, God didn't give him anything else to think about. He just simply remembered. He went back to the basics. He had forgotten one simple thing, and that is that God is in control. We see things from a very limited point of view, brethren. And when we're having a difficult time and we're thinking this is all against me, remember that what we're seeing is just a small part of everything that God sees. And a lot of times we have to be careful, because do you know anybody that you really know that hasn't gone through something or isn't going through something? We may look at people that have money, have wealth, have power, and we think they've got everything going on in their lives, but is that really true? Nobody has it going that well. Everybody gets sick. Everybody has family members that get sick. A lot of times we look at folks and we just try to generalize. Well, they've got it good. Look at how they're doing. In reality, not so. Well, God sees it all before it happens. Notice he feels foolish. What had changed? Absolutely nothing. He just changed simply the way he was looking at it. He remembered what God had to say. Jeremiah chapter 12. Jeremiah chapter 12. Now here is a situation where God is going to be dealing with a prophet. And, well, he doesn't deal with him with kids' gloves, that's for sure. Notice Jeremiah asked the very same question. He's saying, righteous art thou, O Lord. This is verse 1, Jeremiah 12. When I plead with thee, yet let me walk with thee in thy judgments. Now he's going to ask this question. Wherefore, or why doth the way of the wicked prosper? Wherefore they are all happy that deal very treacherously. So what's he saying? I've been looking at this. The good people, they're having a hard time. But these sorry, wicked people, mean-spirited, evil, well, they're running to and fro. They've got it all going on. You know, they're doing very well. But, you know, Jeremiah treads softly, and he tells them, they're happy, they're hypocrites, verse 2. He says, you know me, prepare them for the slaughter. In other words, these people who are treating me so poorly, who are wanting to kill me, Jeremiah, of course, as far as we know, didn't have a single convert the whole time he preached. They didn't want to hear what Jeremiah had to say. It was a burden. It was an oracle. It was something to be bore. And what was he telling them? You're going to be destroyed as a nation, carried away into a foreign land, and you're going to stay there 70 years. They didn't want to hear it. They fought against him, even though very prophets that he worked with, they taught a different thing, said it'd only be a couple of years. They lied. And what does God say to him? Well, God's going to ask him a question. Notice verse 5. He says, if thou hast run with the footmen, and they have wearied thee. In other words, you're on the ground, you're running with the soldiers, and you can't keep up. What are you going to do when you're running with horses, Jeremiah? What's he telling him? Muscle up. Quit having a pity party. Gird up your loins. Be a man. You got a heavy-duty task in front of you. If you've ran with footmen and they've wearied thee, what are you going to do when you've really got to run? When you're running from the horses, when the Chaldeans come, if you will. And if in the land of peace wherein thou truddest, in other words, here you are in an area that's easy to walk around in. If you're having difficulty with it, he says, how wilt thou do in the swelling of Jordan? In other words, when the situation arises is going to be difficult, how are you going to handle that? And so as we look at that, it's a different kind of approach. God did not tell Jeremiah his plans. He just says, he comes at it from a different angle. You think it's tough now, it's going to get worse. In verse 5. Sometimes we get too wrapped up in our own problems. We don't see the big picture. God breaks down through here, and he starts talking about all the things that he's going to do to Israel and some of the things and why that it has taken place. God's telling Jeremiah, you're living in a time of peace, but when the Babylonians come, times are really going to get tough. Once again, God does not give Jeremiah an explanation. He doesn't tell him everything that's involved with this. He just tells him, hang in there. Be tough. What's going to happen to Jeremiah? Well, when the Babylonians do come and take over Jerusalem, Jeremiah is going to be treated very well by the Babylonians. They're going to say, we've heard what you've been preaching. We've heard how you tried to help people. You can stay here. You can go with us. Whatever you want to do, we're going to take care of you. You remember Jeremiah stays there, and of course Jeremiah is taken by his own countrymen to Egypt and probably is killed there. He changes how Jeremiah is looking at it. God says, I'm in control, and I'm going to take care of this, and don't you forget that. Well, let's turn to the book of Habakkuk. Habakkuk is a minor prophet. He's right there behind Nahum and right in front of Zephaniah. He's a very short book. He's got a very short book, 3 chapters. He's a fella, and his question is, God, we're sorry. We're just a sorry bunch of folks. Notice verse 1. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see, O Lord, how long shall I cry, and thou wilt not hear? Even cry out unto thee of violence, and thou wilt not save. Why dost thou show me iniquity and cause me to behold grievance? It says, look at what's happening here. The spoiling of violence before me, and there that raise up strife and contention. Therefore the law is slack. People, in other words, aren't paying any attention to your law, God. And judgment doth not never go forth, for the wicked doth compass about the righteous, therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Brethren, I tell you what, when you read some of these minor prophets, you just stick United States of America in the situation with Jerusalem, with the people of Israel many times, and you see that God deals with wickedness, maybe not on the time frame or the schedule that we would like, but he does deal with it, and that's exactly what he says here. He says in verse 5, behold, though it be told you. For lo, I raise up the Chaldeans. He's raising up the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation. And they shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwellings thereof. What's Habakkuk doing? Saying people in Israel, here in Jerusalem, they're awful. They don't have any more regard for you and the man on the moon. God, when are you going to do something about it? God says, I got to raise up this nation of Chaldeans. And then he goes and talks about the Chaldeans. They're a bunch of pagans. They're awful. And he says, and so here he answers Habakkuk, says, I'm going to take care of the problem. Well, what does Habakkuk say? Art not thou from everlasting, O Lord my God, mine Holy One? We shall not die, talking about Israel. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. You know, I've always thought that didn't quite flow, how he sticks Israel in there and says, we will not die, when obviously he's addressing God. And I thought it was very interesting. I found this. This is from JFB, Jason Fawcett and Brown, I think, is the name of the commentary series. But anyway, it says, the Hebrews, this reading is one of the 18 called by the Hebrews the appointment of the scribes. Quote, it says, the rabbis think that Ezra and his colleagues corrected the old reading here, thou shalt not die. You know, that just makes a whole lot more sense with the context there. You won't find a translation that translates it as such because the Hebrew has been changed. But a lot of Hebrew scholars, a lot of rabbis, scribes, think that this is one of those places where maybe the text was changed. It seems to make a lot more sense that way. But notice in verse 13, thou art of purer eyes than behold evil and can't look on iniquity. He says, how in the world are you going to use these people to destroy us, is the idea there. And so he says, you know, I'm going to sit back here and I am going to wait and see. So he says, these folks are more wicked than we are. Habakkuk says, I'm going to wait for you. Verses 2 and 3 of the next chapter. And through the rest of this chapter, God tells Habakkuk all these woes that, hey, listen, these Chaldeans that I'm raising, they're going to punish you guys. They're going to take you captive. But he says, their day's coming too. Their day is coming too. And so that's all the woes and that I'll take care of it. And then chapter 3, Habakkuk understands. It's called the burden of Habakkuk. It's when Habakkuk questions God, God says, I'm going to address it. Maybe sometimes we're not happy with the way God addresses our problems. But Habakkuk's faith is stronger than ever just because he put his faith in God. He trusted God to do what was right. And these men are examples to us. We have different events that happen in our lives, different things that, illnesses, sickness, reoccurrence of sickness, tests that we are worried about, things that go on in our lives. Every one of us deal with those at some time. People that we love die. People that we want to see faithful who are not. You know, people who leave the Lord. These are all things that happen to us, and we can rest assured that God's in control. We have to trust Him. We have to pray to Him. But Job, you know, Habakkuk, these are men that we can look at and we can say, they did not ignore their problems. They were concerned about them, but they simply changed the way they looked at their problems, and it helped them deal with those problems. So that's what the Bible tries to get us to do. Put our faith and trust in God, and no matter what may, we're going to be okay. Notice how many of our songs talk about the by and by, the afterlife, what we're looking forward to. Why is that? Trust God. Heaven will surely be worth it all. We sing about it, we pray about it, but sometimes when we're living life, we can simply forget about it. Children do this so much better than we do. They trust you with their lives. They love you. Sometimes, just kids are, that's the kind of trust that we need to have. Maybe you're here this evening and you've dealt with these life situations that have caused you difficulty. Just remember, God's in charge. He loves you. If you haven't obeyed the gospel, that's a requirement. God says, you've got to do this. In order to have the advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous, you have to have that propitiation. And He is our propitiation if we obey Him, if we obey the gospel. So don't leave here not being ready to meet God. Now, those various challenges, this suffering that we go through in this life,